Today's daf is daf lamed. As a segue to daf lamed, let's remind ourselves of the brisa on daf chav tes amid beis that records a machlokes between Shimon Atimni and Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. And we're going to try to find an afkamina between the two. According to Shimon Atimni, there is an interdependence between velosia leisha, the obligation of the ones to marry his anusa, and the knas. And according to Shimon Atimni, the interpretation of velosia leisha is isha sheyesh ba'avaya, this tfisas kedushin. On the other hand, the Isur Kares would not generate knas because it's not within the parameters of velosia leisha of yesh ba'avaya. There's no tfisas kedushin in Kares. So therefore, I have Mishnah that says that even in chayve krisus like Baal Achosos chayv knas could not possibly be reconciled with Shimon Atimni. Now we get on to Rav Shimon ben Manasseh. He's of the opinion, if you recall from yesterday, that when it says velosia leisha, it means isha re'uyalo. And any woman, as the Gemara is going to say now, even chayve lavim, since it's not an isha re'uyalo, he's not allowed to be married to her, therefore she's excluded from knas. And again, we see, as we saw earlier, that Reb Shimon ben Manasseh sees an interdependence, a package deal of marriage and knas. The Gemara asks, wait a second, what's an afkamina between Shimon Atimni and Reb Shimon ben Manasseh? The Gemara answers, the nafkamina is going to be the case of Mamzeres, because in the case of Mamzeres, which is only chayve lavim, then according to Shimon Atimni, there would be a chiv knas. There is velosia leisha. Came in the two tfisas kedusha b'chayve lavim. According to according to Reb Shimon ben Manasseh, on the other hand, it's not an isha re'uyalo, and therefore there would be no knas. The Gemara says that nafkamina does not fit in with the Shita Rabbi Akiva, who holds ein kedusha totzin chayve lavim. So it means the mamzeres like other chayve lavim, it's no tfisas kedushin, and therefore even if you take the approach of Shimon Atimni that velosia leisha means yesh pa havaya, there is havaya. So Gemara answers that there are cases in which even Rabbi Akiva is modeh that there is tfisas kedushin. And that is, according to Rabbi Simoi, the case of Almona L'Kohen Gadol. According to Rabbi Simoi, Rabbi Akiva would agree that a Kohen Gadol who has a relationship with an Almona there's no mamzerus, and the reason for that is because of a diuk in the pasuk lo yikach, and then the pasuk says v'lo yechalel, and that means chilul hu oseh the eno oseh mamzerus. So therefore, there is tfisas kedushin according to Rabbi Simoi, even according to Rabbi Akiva in the case of an almona l'kohen gadol. That would exactly be the case. That would be the nafkamina falling in the cracks between Shimon Atimni, who holds that isha sheish ba'havaya, there is havaya, even according to Rabbi Akiva, in the case of almona l'kohen gadol, but rather, and therefore there's knas. Whereas according to Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, she's not an isha re'uyalo, and therefore there's no knas. Now the Gemara introduces another opinion in interpreting Rabbi Akiva, and that's Rabbi Yeshevov. Rabbi Yeshevov seems to assume that in all cases, whenever the Torah says "Ein bo bia b'Yisrael tanisur bia," there's no tfisas kedushin according to Rabbi Akiva. And if that be the case, we're stuck back at square one. What's the difference between Shimon Atimni and Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh? And this leads us to the daf for today. That's daf lamed. The Gemara says, and afkamina is going to be chayve esei mitzri v'adomi. The Torah says, with regard to a mitzri and an adomi, that after 3 doros, you're allowed to invite them, so to speak, into Kal Yisrael. And from that pasuk, we derive an Isur essay, right? It says Dor Shlishi Yavo Lahem B'Kal Hashem in Parachav Gimel in Dvarim, meaning in Parshas Kitetse, and from that we derive the Isur essay of Mitzri ve'Adomi. And the Gemara is assuming now that Kuliyamalo Pligi, in the context of Rabbi Akiva, that there would be Tfisas Kedushin in the case of a Mitzri Rishon with Risheni, despite the fact that it's an Isser Aseh, because an Isser Aseh is not on the level of a lav, and therefore even Rabbi Akiva would assume that Yeshba Havaya, and if Yeshba Havaya, then according to Shimon Atimni, there would be a Chi of Knas, whereas according to Rav Shimon ben Asiyah, she's not an Isser Ru'uyalo, the Torah prohibits the Isser Essay marrying a Mitzri Vadomi, and therefore there would be no Knas. The Gemara says that depends upon how we understand Rabbi Yeshevov. And let's try to understand. If Rabbi Yeshevov, in interpreting Rabbi Akiva, was coming to argue against Rabbi Simoi, then he's arguing about Chayve Lavim, about the case of Mamzeres and Nesina. And he's claiming that according to Rabbi Yeshevov is claiming that according to Rabbi Akiva, there's no Tfisus Kedushin in the case of Mamzeres of Chayve Lavim, and the child therefore would be a Mamzer. And that's where, and the extent to which Rabbi Yeshevov disagrees with Rav Simoy. And therefore you could say that Rabbi Yeshevov would agree to Rav Simoy in the case of Chayve Yeseh of Mitzri Vadomi. And hence we have a very beautiful nafkamina between Shimon Atimni and Rav Shimon ben Asiyah. But the Gemara says, that's good if Lafuki be time of the Rav Simoy Ka'asi Shaper. Ella e time of the Nafshi Ka'amar. If we should analyze the words of Rabbi Yeshevov as an independent statement without putting it in the context of arguing with Rabbi Yeshevov, but rather arguing against Rav Simoy. But rather, Rabbi Yeshevov is saying that according to Rabbi Akiva, culture ain't low bia b'Yisrael avlad mamzer, and that means straight across the board, absolute, without any exception, even in Chayve Yeseh, even in Mitzri Vadomi, the vlad is going to be a mamzer according to this interpretation of Rabbi Yeshevov. And therefore, my benayu, if even in Chayve Yeseh, we're going to say that there's mamzeres according to Rabbi Akiva, then what's the nafkamina between Shimon Atimni and Rav Shimon ben Asiyah? Benayu be'ul l'kohen gadol. Now, be'ul l'kohen gadol is again a violation of an Isser essay. The Torah says, "Hu b'psula isha b'psula yikach u'may shna," and the Gemara answers, "The havile essay sheino shavah b'kol." Even according to the more extreme approach of Rabbi Yeshevov and Rabbi Akiva, in a case of something that's not shavah b'kol, for example, the case of Be'ula l'kohen gadol, which is an Isser that applies to one person on the face of the earth, the kohen gadol. That's called an Isser Kal, Kuf Lamed, relative to all the other Isurim, including Mitzri Vadomi. It's an Isser Kal, it's on the bottom echelon of this totem pole. And Rabbi Akiva would agree in this case that Yesh Tfisas Kedushin, and there's no Mamzerus from the vlad of such a marriage relationship. But now we have a clear-cut nafkamina between Shimon Hatimni and Rav Shimon ben Asiyah. According to Shimon Hatimni, Yesh Havaya, and therefore there would be Knas in the case of Almana l'kohen gadol. Whereas according to Rav Shimon ben Asiyah, there would be no Knas, and the reason for that is because it's Eino Yochel l'kaima, Eino Ruya l'kaima. Even though Nida is an Isser Kares, and we say that if there's an Isser Kares, then both Shimon Atimni and Rav Shimon Asiyah would agree that there is no Knas, but here there would be a Knas even though it's an Isser Kares. And why is that? Lemandi Omar, let's go through the two Shitas. If we go according to Shimon Atimni, then Yesh Havaya. If a man marries a Nida, then she's married. Ulamandi, according to Rav Shimon ben Asiyah, then everything depends on whether it's Ruya l'kaima and Ruya l'kaima. Hanami Ruya l'kaima. He doesn't have to divorce his wife because she's a Nida. And the Gemara says, Ula afuke. Our Mishnah says that even in Chayve Lav like a choso, you're Chayv Knas, and we don't apply the principle of Kim Lev b'Rabbi Minei. And that's against Rabbi Nechumi ben Akona. So we're talking about a case of someone who has a relationship with his achoso. There was no asra. Therefore, we assume it was a shodeg. And nevertheless, according to Rabbi Nechumi ben Akona, there's no chiv tashlumin, and we apply the principle of kim lev b'Rabbi, even though there's no kares befal. But the Maisa, in theory, in abstract potential would generate kares. The Sanya Rab Nechui ben Akana Ya'os says Yom Kippur b'Shabbos l'tashlumin. What does it mean? If a man violates Yom Kippur, which is an Isur kares, and at the same time he incurs what would normally be a chiyuv of compensation, he burns down somebody's haystack, he's potter. Why? Ma Shabbos mitzchay benafsho u potter ben tashlumin af Yom Kippur mitzchay benafsho potter ben tashlumin. So it means that if you have a maisa which would generate kares, according to Rabbi Nachman ben Akana, you would not be chayiv, you wouldn't incur any chiyuv, any obligation to pay financial compensation. Now the Gemara is going to try to analyze Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana. My time with Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana on Rabbaye, Nemar ason bidei Adam and Nemar ason bidei Shamayim. So this is Abaye. Soon we'll see Rav. Rav has a different approach to Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana. But according to Abaye, when the Torah says ason, which refers to Misa bidei Adam, that's in Parshas Mishpatim, where a man hits a pregnant woman and she loses the babies. If she dies, then he's potter from Tashlum. The Torah says loya on ason. If she doesn't die, she survives the blow, then anosh yeonish. That's in the parsha of Adam Amake Ichamu Beres in Parshas Mishpatim. Now we get to Yaakov Avinu. V'nemar ason b'dei Shamayim. Now we have a case not of an onesh misa for killing someone, like in the case of Isha Hara Shenigfa, but rather the case of Yaakov when he sends Binyamin down to Mitzrayim, and he tells the brothers to be very careful because they might die on the way down to Mitzrayim. And the pasuk says that what is Yaakov Avinu afraid of? He's afraid of karo ason baderech eshel telchu bo. There may be something terrible will happen to Binyamin on the way down in the journey down to Mitzrayim. Again, the word ason, and this is going to give Abaye a gzera shava ason v'ason, because the first ason is an ason misa b'dei shamayim. The second ason is misa b'dei adam. Ma ason omer b'dei adam patmin tachlumen, af ason omer b'dei shamayim patmin tachlumen. So therefore, let's say, for example, kares, which is a punishment b'dei shamayim, is potter from tashlumin, just like chil Shabbos, which is misa b'dei adam, is potter from tashlumin. Maskif lo Rav Ada Barava mimai dechi kom azer lehu Yaakov liboneh livnei. Our son is, how do you know? We're talking about Misa b'dei Adam, Al Tzinin Upachin, and the Gemara is assuming that Tzinin Upachin, he walks on cold stones and so forth, and so he gets sick and ill, chas v'shalom, he could die. That's all considered b'dei shamayim. The Gemara later on is going to make an about face, and on the contrary, tzinin upachin is something that a person brings upon himself because he exposed himself to cold. So how do you know, Abaye, that what Yaakov Avinu was worried about with Binyamin when he said ason, pen yikrenu ason, it was talking about b'dei shamayim, like tzinin upachin, dilmal aryeh v'ganve. Maybe he was afraid that Binyamin Chasro would be attacked by a lion or by marauders who will take his life. That's b'dei Adam. Now we understand very well that Ganve is b'dei Adam, but why is Aryeh b'dei Adam? Wouldn't you rather say that Aryeh is something that's divinely sent to a person as a punishment b'dei Shamayim? And yet Rav Ada Barav is insisting that what Yaakov Avinu was concerned with was b'dei Adam. And therefore he objects to the conclusion of Abayi's Gzeir Shava that also means bidei shamayim. What do you mean? It's not bidei shamayim, says Rav Ada Barav. It's bidei Adam, because an Arya is bidei Adam. Why is an Arya bidei Adam? So the footnote here, he says something very ambiguous, and he says that ason al yidei Arya ena bidei shamayim. It's not bidei shamayim. It's almost as if the implication of Rav Ada Barav is that an animal, when it attacks a human being, it does so out of freedom of choice, so to speak. The animal is granted freedom of choice. It's not part of a divine plan. Gemara is going to reject this outright. Gemara asks, Otu Yaakov, Yaakov Kol Mini Aser. Why do you assume, Rav Ada Barav, that Yaakov was only worried about Aryeh Uganve and not about Tzinu Pachin? He was obviously worried about everything. And therefore, the word ason, the karo ason, that came out of the mouth of Yaakov Avinu, is referring not just to tzidin upachin, but also to aryeh uganve. And if it's referring to both, then okay, aryeh uganve, I grant you right now, is bidei adam, but tzidin upachin was also included under ason, and that is bidei shamayim. And therefore, we see that ason refers to even bidei shamayim, and we plug that back into the ason of Isha Hara She Nagafosa, and there the Torah is talking about Kim Levi Rabbi. I tell you that Kim Levi Rabbi, even in an Asa B'dei Shamayim, similar to Sidin Upachim. Gemara objects, Sidin Upachim B'dei Shamayim Ninu? What? But Tanya, we have a Brisa Kol B'dei Shamayim Chutz B'Sidin Upachim. When a person is Poshea and he exposes himself unduly to the cold, or he walks barefoot on a cold floor, etc., then he brings upon himself tzidin upachin. Shenemar says in Mishlei, tzidin pachin b'derech ikesh, shomer nafsho yirchak mihem. If he's careful, he'll stay far away from tzidin upachin. Visu, and furthermore, aryeh uganve b'dei adam ninu. Okay, ganve maybe, but man gets chashom attacked by an animal, that's b'dei adam. Whether this is Shia, okay. If he went to Kruger Park and he got too close to the lions, okay, I understand. But we're not talking about that case. We're talking about Neil Begov Harayas. I mean, there's no Shia over here. Omer Rav Yosef. Okay, now we have a whole statement based on a brisa of Rabbi Chia about the 4 Mises Bezdin. That when there was a Sanhedrin, if a person violated a capital crime, he was given, depending on what kind of crime it was, one of 4 possible Mises Bezdin. Now that we have no Sanhedrin, right? It's after the Churban, but Sanhedrin, we don't have Misa B'dei Adam, but we do have Misa B'dei Shamayim, and the Misa itself will indicate which Misa B'dei Adam he was chayav. And it says here, even though we don't have a court in Israel that can be done din in nefashos, but we do have din misas bezdin, meaning that God will mete out the punishment of misas bezdin to the person who was chayav that particular misa. He'll get that particular misa. So the Gemara asks, what do you mean? Lo batlu, ha batlu. We don't have a Sanhedrin. Ella, says the Gemara, and here we're going to turn to Daf Lamed Amid Beis.